Hey, I'm Clayco and I help people through existential crises. So what I had is an obsessive mind that couldn't stop thinking in logic. Everything needed to be completely logical, and I needed to understand on this purely logical level. The issue that I was having with reality is that it seemed evil and pointless to me. All of this suffering and all of this pain existed, and I kind of wanted to find a reason or logic behind it. And before I believed in God, which kind of helped me make sense of it as some sort of meaningful plan for some higher power. But then when I lost this belief in God, I started to feel extremely lost. And I started to wonder, is this world actually fundamentally evil? And then the logical mind tries to kind of rationalize itself around this idea because it cannot accept that the world is fundamentally evil. And that's because it's wrong. It's not accurate. But with logic alone, it's very easy to think yourself into this place because it doesn't require a genius to notice that there are a lot of things that are very much fucked up. A lot of things actually doesn't do it justice. There might be an infinite things that are really fucked up. And if you've gone through some extreme emotionally traumatizing event, then you know how fucked up things can truly get. And then you multiply it on scale for all of humanity, and things start to look very grim. So grim, in fact, that you have no idea how to save yourself from such a dark reality. And then the only thing the mind clings onto is the idea of logic. It's the idea of rational thinking. This is a trap, because the rational mind will always find a reason to go back to the dark place, to go back to reasons why existence might actually not be worth it. The reason for that is because the logical mind and the ego is very much interconnected. So the ego is the construct within your mind that creates your sense of identity, your sense of self. And instead of some abstract philosophical idea, I like to ground it in some mechanical truth, which is basically the entire collection of behavioral loops, belief systems, and emotions that cause you to act how you act and causes you to present yourself how you present yourself. This is your sense of identity. And I might say, okay, what has my sense of identity to do with the grand narrative of suffering in existence? Well, it's exactly that. It's the narrative itself. You narrate this suffering of your own life or your own existence as some brutal truth that must be dealt with. But this entire framework is already extremely biased towards your own human experience. A spider doesn't concern itself over global suffering, so doesn't do an ant or a rock, which, I mean, they're not conscious how we are, but it still is a state of being, right? A rock still exists. So no matter what type of lens you take of reality, it completely shapes everything around it. Like a rock would shape itself around itself, right? It's just what it is. So when you start to see reality as a huge narrative of suffering, you basically become this narrative of suffering. You create a history where this is the case. Now, I don't want to deny all of the suffering that actually exists, as it is very meaningful and pointing to some grounding truth that makes us connect with each other. But in matter of fact, all suffering that you narrate in your head that isn't actually present with you right now is pretty much an illusion or a trick of the mind. You're creating your own suffering by creating a narrative around it. This can be because of a past event that has happened to you that left you scarred, and now indirectly your mind tries to circumvent it by thinking itself in stories. Because these stories also become a sort of narrative protection. You start to also feel comfortable in certain stories, and it's very uncomfortable to imagine that they are not true. So the ego is the way we relate to each other, how we create an identity with each other's interactions. And then from there, we form stories and narratives about who we are and what we're supposed to be, and how we shouldn't be, and all of this human stuff. And through that, we create our own internal reality bubble that feels quite real. Now, this ego is like software that runs in the background, but actually is burning a massive amount of energy in your daily life. Because instead of thinking about it as some, abstract philosophical idea, I like to boil things down to pure mechanics. Like the ego as a mechanical system within your own body or within your own brain that determines how you behave and how you act in the world. But the ego, for most humans alive right now, is not a healthy thing. All anxiety and depression and discomforts and just dissatisfaction with life relates back to this ego identity. Because this ego identity does a certain type of recursive loop around itself. So it thinks that it doesn't feel good in one particular day, like you are in a bad mood. And then instead of just noticing this experience of a bad mood and letting it slide, it then starts to narrate the bad mood and to come up with reasons of why it feels bad. And then it basically invents reasons of why one feels bad. And it's not that there's not always a cause and effect there, or there's not sort of a real relationship there, but it doesn't end with some cause and effect. It ends in a huge story about your life and society and human consciousness and all of the stuff that becomes way too overwhelming to handle, when the truth is that you might just have woken up in a bad mood. So it creates a convincing illusion that you're kind of separated from reality and you are distanced from your actual experience. And this illusion is so convincing that you then start to think that you're somehow separated or isolated from reality or other people. Because logically, you're kind of just in your own head or in your own experience, and you can never actually touch another person's experience or awareness. And here the ego tries to connect with each other or have some sort of intimate relationship with each other so we can feel fulfilled and not alone anymore. But when you really look at your own conscious experience, you must wonder, where do you actually start and where do other things begin? Because if all you experience is always within your own awareness and with your own consciousness, you're somehow always interacting just with yourself. You're never really interacting with something else. And there comes also a sensation of isolation or feeling of, unfulfillment. So then what the ego tries to do, basically, it tries to create some meaning out of this situation, some meaning out of reality. The idea that helped me a lot through these struggles is to understand the physics of the suffering or the physics of this discomfort. Because everything in the universe, as far as we know, follows physical laws. And once we understood these physical laws, we could predict how things move. And this way we invented all sorts of scientific discoveries, like electricity or electromagnetism, which back in the day, before they were discovered, seemed absolutely absurd and impossible. So in the same way, I propose to you that the ego is a structure within your own mind. And within this structure, there can be different shapes that present themselves. And this then changes how you experience your life and how you feel. And whenever you don't like something, it's like within your own consciousness, the ego is contracting from an experience. It is basically causing dissonance because something, is unpleasant. So then these defensive patterns, your behavioral patterns, run automatically like a protective code to control your current moment experience. And part of this protective code is your own intelligence and your ability to think logically around problems and storytelling. So then you basically put yourself into this odd situation that whenever you don't like something about reality, or you don't like something about your own experience, better said, you end up in endless intellectual and philosophical loops that never resolve, because the actual solution was never in the mind, but in the actual experience that is right in front of you. The mind creates suffering by constantly imagining and creating some artificial goals that relate to itself, which is relating to the ego self. But when you really wonder who is it relating to, like what is the self that is trying to be figured out or trying to be solved, all you end up with again is this weird empty sense of consciousness where a ton of experiences happen and there's a lot of sensations. But you cannot really pinpoint yourself. You cannot really locate in your own vision or in your own body, if you close your eyes, where are you exactly? Because you are made out of so many forms of qualia, which are sensations of experience, and they can be found everywhere. When you close your eyes, they're in your stomach. When you put intention to your feet, you can feel gravity. When you smell, you can sense the air. And you can notice how many of these qualias are there. And when you look for some sort of self-qualia that is experiencing it, you cannot find it. All you find is the sensations themselves. So the ego survives by taking these sensations, building stories around them, and trying to protect itself from potential negative qualia in the future. And then it also takes negative experiences from the past and then takes ownership of them and says, this is me. So there's an entire defensive architecture that happens in the logical mind that is just there to kind of manipulate and control your current moment experience. And it often doesn't like actually to introspect on this entire construction, because the more you introspect on this entire construction, everything starts to feel a bit fake. Like, just because you have a thought in your mind doesn't mean that the thought is true. And it also doesn't mean that the thought really matters that much. And especially, and here it can get a bit unsettling for some people, but the thought is also not you. It is another sensation in this entire ocean of conscious experience. And the more you introspect into that, the more you start to feel things you maybe not have felt before, and the more you feel this desire and this pull to externalize whatever is going on within you internally. Because it is more pleasant to think that the world is just evil and destructive and we are all doomed than to actually introspect on which ways you have not built the right character structure for yourself. In which ways have you come short to be comfortable in your body and see yourself for who you really are? Because within all of these narratives, what the ego actually does is that it actively lies to you. Because once it has a story about who you are, it does not want to change the story. Changing the story would be destroying itself. It would be destroying what it tried to construct in order for you to be distracted from your actual authentic experience. So then after time, you feel like you are more an idea of a person than who you actually are. And whenever you get criticized, you feel uncomfortable or threatened in your identity because other people might contradict what you see in yourself. And if you are very insecure in your own ego identity, well, then it's going to hurt. And it might hurt really bad. But this is also where change can happen, by seeing yourself in a different light, maybe even in a more truthful light. Because there are a lot of truths that are like stored in the unconscious that we do not want to look at, because they really threaten this entire narrative we have constructed about ourselves and reality. Then there also comes this idea that when you procrastinate on something that you have to do, like you have to study for a test, or you need to give a certain job for your boss, then it becomes very easy to just label yourself as lazy or as a failure so that you don't follow through with it. Because you have the narrative of, I always fail when I try to do these things, and you don't need to try to take the next step. The ego prefers the illusion of potential than to actually go through with it and change reality. Because within the idea of what you could become or what you could do, the ego lives. But in shutting down the mind and actually doing the thing, the ego dies. Because it lives in the thought of what is possible and not in the action of what is possible. The action changes what it is and makes you become something else. And the more you change the relationship to yourself, the more the sense of ego loosens and dissolves, and you start to become more immersed with the qualia of sensations, with the sense of beingness instead of the idea of thought. And from there, these entire narratives of the world being evil, or the world being some sort of fake construct, or the world needing to be solved as some sort of problem, get swept away. Because there's nothing that you can really solve. You cannot think yourself out of reality, and you can also not think yourself out of consciousness, and you can also not think yourself out of yourself. You're always you, and it's a totality. And all what you're doing is really resisting the truth and not accepting what you really are made out of. I worked through people's identities now for 3 years, and I always was developing my approach, trying to understand how can I actually effectively help people. And I've developed a protocol now that has come out of its beta, which is the Ego Architecture Audit. And for more information for this professional service, you can check out the link below. And secondly, my community is now open again, but it's now a private community, which is linked to my Substack. If you want to go into a community with genuine seekers who are genuinely interested in these ideas of consciousness, reality, and ego, and are sincere with themselves in the discovery process, then I really recommend you to check out this community. You can also enter for free and to just take a look. And if you then really want to be part of it, you can always upgrade. So see ya.